Everyone wait. I have looked into the future. I have seen into my mind's eye, and I know for a fact what will be banned. Am I sure about that, though? Hey everybody, welcome to the Knowledge Pool, a think tank of games and magic. So today I wanted to do something real quick. I have a couple of decently large projects in the works as far as videos go, and it takes some time to get those kind of things together. So instead today I wanted to go over our previous video in response to the new ban list that came out today. That would be June 1st, 2020, that involves standard, historic, and a new rule change to companions. Now, just as a little context to this, a couple weeks ago we talked about what makes a card bannable, and that video is in the description. It's also on the channel if you didn't get a chance to watch it. And I talk about cards and what they do and how the updates to the ban list have to do with mathematical procedure and win rate, deck diversity, all kinds of stuff like that. You should check out that video. It's worth watching, and it gives a little idea of what they think about every time that they choose to ban something. I happen to put in as a footnote in that video a small tack to the ban list that came out the day I was printing the video, and there was no standard bannings on it as of yet. At the time, they did a couple of legacy and vintage bans based on the companions, more on that in a minute, and also a few things for other formats, brawl and whatnot. So this standard and historic ban are in response to a little more data being gotten from Wizards and deciding to make a move on what's going on with standard decks, what's going on with historic decks, and what's going on in general with companion as a rule. So I'm going to bring up the new banned and restricted ads that they did as of today. We're going to talk about what's going on with them, and we're going to talk about how they relate to what we were talking about last week, just to sort of finish off the topic. So here's the new bans for standard and historic. And of course, historic uses terms like suspended because they're not exactly saying that things are fully out banned. They want to give them a couple weeks to percolate, see what happens, and then decide whether or not they're actually going to ban it. But they are basically banned as far as things go. So we'll talk about the new companion rule in a minute, but first I want to talk about standard. In standard, Agent of Treachery and Fires of Invention both got banned. Now, if you watched my last video, you would know that of all of the cards that we talked about potentially seeing banned, Fires of Intervention and Agent of Treachery were up there on the top tier cards that we made a decent argument for getting banned. They create a high win rate, they are consistent in how quickly they can come out and damage a board state, and there's all sorts of things that go into making those cards good. So let's look at Fires of Invention. When it comes to Fires of Invention, what we're really looking at here is how much mana is too much mana to have access to on a particular turn. Now, if you are a commander player, you might already know the most dangerous blue card to let land on the board for long-term gameplay. And if you answered Expropriate, I hate you because you're kinda right. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Omniscience. Omniscience is a very high-costed card in terms of mana, but its effect as an enchantment is that you get to play anything that you play without paying its mana cost. So, casting spells becomes free. In a commander game, it is one of the highest cards that people will target when it comes to getting it off of the board with enchantment hate, with counter spells, with player removal. That player immediately becomes a target because suddenly their entire deck is free game to them. They have the incredible potential of blowing up everybody's lands and still being able to play everything that they want to play at any time that they want to play it, no questions asked. Because of this, Omniscience is a hugely powerful card. let's get back to Fires of Invention. Fires of Invention does the same thing Omniscience does with some slight provisos. Sure, you have to technically have the right number of lands to cast anything that you want from your deck. But when you're on turn 4, your deck curves out at turn 5, you're not looking at that much of a difference when it comes to land situations. Also, it only lets you cast 2 spells a turn and keeps it limited to your turn. To which I say, so what? You're still getting access to 10 mana's worth of stuff on turn 5, and honestly, you're just gonna wreck when you can play 2 5-cost spells in one turn, unless your opponent is afforded the same luxury. Also, it doesn't allow you to play interrupts, which I will say does cut it down considerably from what Omniscience does in the long term. However, in competitive play, at that level, you're not going to see a bajillion interactions anyway. Not like you would see interactions in Commander anyway. We showed off that combo in that last video that essentially meant that the person got 15 mana of free play and how they learned how to abuse it. And it's just amazing. It's an insane amount of advantage. And with that advantage came very little disadvantage when you built your deck around that situation. So, Fires is banned. Fire probably needs to be banned. Let's see what Magic said about it. Over the course of the last several weeks, Fires of Invention decks have risen to have a dominant win rate and metagame presence in Standard, achieving a 55% win rate and having even or favorable matchups against each of the other top 10 deck archetypes. This indicates that the metagame forces alone aren't sufficient enough to keep the deck in check. In addition, as we craft and test future environments, we found the card Fires of Invention to be a significant design and balance restraint. Because of the flexible nature of the cost reduction effect, Fires of Invention decks would continue to gain power as new high mana cost spells are added to the environment. As new sets have been released, we've seen the win rates of Fires of Invention decks increase compared to past standard metagame environments. Because of Fires of Invention decks' current high win rate and metagame share, and the risks and design constraints it poses to the environment going forward, Fires of Invention is banned in Standard. I want you all to take a moment and understand that this is one of those golden moments that everyone asks for and they kind of glaze over. A lot of times when people are playing the game, they say things like, oh, well, Wizards won't admit that they made a mistake, that a card was grossly overpowered and they didn't do anything about it and they didn't try to stop it or anything like that. This is one of those times that that person is wrong, and you should be glad that Magic is being forthright with the way that they are doing things. Wizards of the Coast has said straight out in this thing that when they started building new cards and testing new environments, meaning the next couple standards that we're going to see, that Fires of Invention is only going to get better because high-costed cards are good and they are getting to play them for free. So, since it was causing design constraints, they were having troubles actually building the game because of the way that this was formed, they banned it. And also because it was winning too much, like we had said before, over 50% all the time. Better than even or favorable matchups with no real unfavorable matches, it's a reason to ban. Now let's talk about Agent of Treachery. Agent of Treachery was the other big card that we had said, hey, this is probably going to get a ban, or this could get a ban, and this is why. It is in multiple decks that are doing really, really well. It is backbreaking to lose permanence on an early turn, and with the number of ways to cheat things out, it comes out quickly and it becomes hard to actually play the game on the opponent's side of the field. I know that for me this past week has been nothing but me just looking at a agent land on the board on turn 4 when I have an answer for it on turn 5, except now I don't because I don't have the mana. This is Wizards' reasoning on banning Agent of Treachery. It says, We've seen a rise in archetypes that either use Luca, Coppercoat Outcast, or Winota Joiner of Forces to put Agent of Treachery directly into play. While part of the design intent of these cards was to provide creative ways to deploy powerful, high mana cost creatures, we've observed that using them to play an early Agent of Treachery can be uniquely frustrating to play against and difficult to come back from. The effect of stealing any lands or key cards when at a high play rate reduces diversity in the metagame. Decks built around unique permanents or big creatures have less chance to succeed when opponents can steal their key cards without specific deck building intent. I consider this another high five to Wizards and what they are trying to do with the metagame. They understand, they pinpoint, that Agent of Treachery causes all these issues, all these frustrations, that other versions of the deck do not. We talked about that in the last video. Winota decks in Standard without Agent of Treachery play a bunch of decent creatures. Now, is Haktos hard to get around? Sure, but it's certainly not as hard to get around as you losing everything that you hold dear because your opponent flips up 3 Agents of Treachery on turn 4. It's just not as easy to deal with. It's so critical that you be able to play the game. And when cards create a situation where you cannot play the game, it causes problems. I'm looking at you, Teferi. I'm looking at you. Also, people wonder why Teferi did not get a ban in this situation. I'll just come out and say what my thoughts are on that. Teferi didn't get a ban because Teferi is the only reason that Simic flashes and annoying every single person in Standard. And so they are keeping it because it's going to be rotating out in a couple more months. And while the control players are not happy about it, when Teferi rotates out, so will most of the decent pieces of Simic Flash. So we'll be able to see some interactivity and counterspells and blah 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 on the next Standard, but it won't be a full deck that just reams everybody. I do want to talk about Historic, but I think we've kept the elephant waiting in the room long enough. Time to address the companion rules change. Now, we have not talked a lot about companions and their broken efficiency because honestly, I didn't have a full opinion formed on the subject. Every time I looked at companions, for the most part, it felt pretty easy to deal with. I had multiple games of my own ventures into Historic and in Standard, where if a deck is built completely around their companion and then I destroy their companion, they immediately concede because they just can't win the game without their companion on board. The Lurrus decks were very instrumental in this opinion making because I'd run into a ton of these Lurrus decks. They'd get Lurrus out, they'd Ghost Form it, and then I used Heartless Act on it twice, killed it, and good game scoop. These decks are very interesting because of the way that they work, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're talking about whether or not companions are too big of a problem overall. And the answer is probably yeah. Just having an 8th card in your hand makes things significantly better. Having an 8th card that your opponent can't interact with because it's not technically in your hand is even better. And even though there are deck building constraints, most of them kind of don't matter, so who cares? Because of that setup, companions were a little too strong, especially the Yorion thing with the combination of fires and Agent of Treachery. So the new companion rule reads, once per game, anytime you could cast a sorcery that's during your main phase when the stack is empty, you can pay 3 generic mana to put your companion from your sideboard into your hand. This is a special action, not an activated ability. So a quick run through of what that means. You're playing Lutri as your companion. So your entire deck is still 1 copy of every non-land card in it. Lutri is sitting off on the side in your sideboard doing nothing. At any point in the game that it is your turn and there's no stacks on the spell, i.e. times you can cast things at sorcery speed, you can pay 3, put Lutri in your hand. Now Lutry's in your hand for whenever you want to use it. This effect is very interesting because it creates a situation, one, where you have to use your mana on your turn in order to get the benefit of getting Lutry into your hand. But it also gives your opponent an extra turn to deal with things from your hand. So if they've been holding on to their hand disruption, waiting for you to put Lutry in your hand, they will probably have that opportunity to use the card in question. Wizard says a lot of stuff on this, but I'm going to try to keep it short. While Magic rules changes aren't normally a part of the banned and restricted list updates, in this case we're introducing a change to the companion mechanic that is motivated by game balance and metagame share across play environments. Effective with this update, the companion mechanic now reads the way that we said it read before. It also mentions that it can't be countered by or stopped by cards like Phyrexian Revoker. Phyrexian Revoker does the same thing that's kind of like Pithy Needle does, where you choose a card and then sources with that card name can't activate activated abilities. This is not an activated ability. The companion 3 cost is a special action. It can't be countered. It can't be responded to. It just happens. You pay 3, it goes into your hand. It's not on the stack. It doesn't affect the stack. So, therefore, this is what it is. It goes on to say that basically they felt like the way the rule was designed, it was causing too many issues in too many formats, and they could just keep going back and tweaking which ones are banned and which ones are not banned and blah, 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 blah. Or they could just make a wholesale change to the companion rule, and it will probably fix the problem overall, and that is what they're mainly worried about. This is another one of those instances where Wizards is acknowledging that they made a mistake. This mistake might not be as egregious as some of the other mistakes that we talked about, but it is kind of important to note that they intentionally worded the part of companion that goes on the card in a specific way because they thought maybe we would have to change the way the companion mechanic worked, and they did. They also said it's something that they don't like doing in the future. They do not want to make it where rules can just kind of change on the fly, but they had a feeling on this one. They did what they had to do. The good side of this is that we will definitely see less games where companions rule the day, because with your companion having to go into your hand, it adds another step to things. Another 3 mana that you'll have to pay for it will affect the lower costed ones by quite a bit, and the higher costed ones probably a little more severely, as it will not make it so that your opponent can just slap Garuda on the board. They have to do something about it first. What this means especially is that we might actually see an unbanning of Lutry from the Commander format. I don't think that this will change the bannings in Legacy and Vintage when it comes to Lurrus and Zirda, because honestly those two just kind of mess up formats in general, and in a format where you can easily get out a certain amount of mana on turn 1, even the extra 3 mana is not really going to stop anyone from playing it, so those will probably stay where they're supposed to. Overall, I think this change is healthy for the meta, and it's a change that I did not hear amongst the wild speculations of what they would do to companions, but I honestly think that it's a much better one than any of the speculations that I've heard, because having that flat mana cost to put it into your hand, it's just like, functionally it's really, really powerful, and I love that. Last thing we're going to talk about real quick is the historic suspensions. For similar reasons as in Standard, we're choosing to suspend Fires of Invention and Agent of Treachery in Historic. As we continue to watch Historic grow and monitor the evolution of the metagame, we will, in the future, reevaluate whether it's appropriate to unsuspend each of these cards or whether the suspensions will become bans. So Agents and Fires is getting bans in Historic as well. Essentially, suspensions are temporary bans, so they're bans. I don't really know one way or another if this was necessary, because in my own experience playing Historic, and I've been playing a lot of Historic, I haven't really noticed either one of these cards causing too many issues. I was having a lot more troubles with Winota in Historic, because in Historic it has access to Marauder, which lets you double every source's damage, so your opponent would just swing with their 3 people, and rather than grabbing 3 Agents of Treachery, they grab 3 Marauders and go, each one of my creatures is doing more than 20 damage, what you gonna do? But overall, I understand what they're doing. Standard and Historic aren't so different just yet that it makes sense not to suspend those two. And if you choose not to get rid of Winota, then even getting rid of Marauder, you'd still have to deal with Agent. So, yeah. I'm going to go out on a limb here and just kind of say that I think Historic is in a really healthy place. And if you are an Arena player and you are not attempting to branch into Historic, I think Historic is a really fun format. I've seen a lot of diversity personally. I know some people are saying that certain decks are just giving them the tool over, but I haven't noticed that in my own personal play experience, and I would highly recommend giving Historic a shot if you can. Anyway, that's it for today, and this is what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I thought that the ban list this time around was very good. It's going to be healthy for most of those formats. I'd like to see the long-term things of this. Be sure that if you have rare wildcards, go ahead and use them before June 4th on the banned cards below, because in Arena they'll refund you wild cards equal to the number of copies that you have of these cards in your collection. And I've been Dish, and everybody out of the pool.